of the fantasy football season. And here's a few quarterbacks I have as sleeper options this week. The first guy, Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Lawrence, I know he struggled the last month or two of the season here, where he's rarely throwing touchdowns or putting up fantasy points. And this Jacksonville team's been free-falling, losing 5 out of 6. But right here, on paper, it is a good matchup at the Tennessee Titans that give up the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And in Week 5, he did have a good game, Lawrence, for fantasy owners versus Tennessee. 273 pass yards, a touchdown, and he threw 28 rush yards and a rushing touchdown. And right here, he's got that same matchup in Tennessee, obviously, in Week 14. So the last few weeks here for Lawrence have definitely been a struggle, though. Week 11 versus San Francisco, 158 pass yards, 23 yards rushing. Week 12 versus Atlanta, 228 pass yards, a touchdown, and they throw 39 yards rushing and 2-point conversion. And Week 13 at the Rams, 145 pass yards and 10 rushing yards. So right here, I'm not expecting a huge game out of him, but if you're in a pinch and in dire need of a quarterback in very deep leagues or 2-quarterback leagues, I don't think Lawrence is the worst option in the world, and he's available in 72% of fantasy leagues. The next quarterback I have as a sleeper option this week, Zach Wilson of the New York Jets. So last week was one of the better games in terms of fantasy points for Zach Wilson in his young rookie career versus Philadelphia, where he had 226 pass yards, 2 touchdowns and and a rushing touchdown for 25 fantasy points. I know it's been a struggle for him this season, even though before he went down with the injury from Week 8 to Week 11, but the last couple weeks for him, Week 10 in his return at Houston, he didn't do much. 145 pass yards, and 2 rush attempts, 3 yards, and a touchdown. And then Week 13 I mentioned, so Week 14 on paper, it's a decent matchup versus the New Orleans Saints that give up the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. But right here, Zach Wilson, we'll see if he could have another good game. I know I like the Saints this week as a top 6 defense, but right here, if you're in a deep league in a pinch where you got to get a quarterback, Zach Wilson's available right now in 93% of fantasy leagues. And if you're in dire need, he's a guy that I have as a sleeper this week. And the third and final quarterback I have as sleeper options, Teddy Bridgewater of the Denver Broncos. So I know Bridgewater has been a mediocre to poor quarterback over the last few weeks of the season here. But he's got a pretty good matchup versus the Detroit Lions, that obviously is probably the worst team in football this season. 1-10-1 record, getting their first win last week. So the last few games here for Bridgewater, Week 10 versus Philly, 226 pass yards. Week 12 versus the Chargers, 129 pass yards, a touchdown, 10 rushing yards, a touchdown. And then Week 13 at Kansas City, a quiet ball game, 257 passing, a touchdown, 2 windows, and 17 rushing yards. So right now, Bridgewater is available in 75% of fantasy leagues here. And it's a good matchup versus Detroit, even though I don't like a lot of Broncos in this game. But I think Bridgewater could put up serviceable numbers if you need a quarterback in deeper leagues. So that's a few quarterbacks I have as sleeper options for Week 14 of the fantasy football season.